wherever you are. Welcome to Monday's Grain Market Blast. It is Monday, the 21st of April. It is Easter Monday. Just waiting for Angie to come along. And as usual, Angie will be providing a rapid roundup of the latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. But before she does, I'll better get the legals out the way. So, as usual, nothing discussed on this Spaces session constitutes trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ or indeed the hosts, which, as you know by now, is myself, Mr. Ryan Paisley, and the wonderful, the magnificent, the resplendent Angie Setzer. Is that good enough?
Yeah, it was great. I couldn't unmute myself. I was over here just I was just amazed. I don't even know. I was paralyzed by the lyrical gifts that you are given. So,
but you know what?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's obviously Easter Monday over here in the UK, so it's actually a bank holiday, and I've been roped into gardening and helping my old man do some gardening. So I couldn't have been happier when my alarm went off to
Now
remind me
I
for the
see.
blast.
Yeah, you were like, let's do the blast today. I was like, it's a vacation. You're like, no, we can do it. So
No,
that's
I'm like,
what.
I'm not built for manual labor, and me and some secretaires, it's going to end in tears. So I was like, "Where's Angie? Where's Angie?" Anyway,
All right, let's party though. So welcome. Yeah, here in the US, we don't do none of those silly day after holidays. You might, if you're lucky, if you get the day ahead of time, you better show up the next day. That's how we roll here. Christmas, Easter, whatever, there's no day after. You just come in. So we're back. We started last night, and then the markets opened higher. So first things first here, we did get an update on the the port fee proposal that we had tossed at us there. And it does appear as though ag commodities will be exempt. So there is this little tiny, everyone's kind of trying to figure out, okay, hold on a minute. Because they are exempt if they show up empty, they being the ship. Obviously there's some exemptions for certain sizes, different ports, the Great Lakes ports, and some of these other smaller ones are going to be exempt from the fees themselves and things like that. So it was seen as somewhat positive, though, like I said, I'm not really sure what you have with the ship showing up empty to load. Do they bring in fertilizer? Do they bring in other products? That I am, not 100% clear on. And so we'll see if there will be an impact, but at the very least, it appears as if there were port fee impacts to ag exports, you'd be able to spread it across a couple different loadings. Potentially it'd be something that would be included on the inbound ship and the outbound. But for now, there is an exemption in place, and the industry itself has breathed a bit of a sigh of relief. For those outside of the agricultural commodity exporting world and some of these others, the fee structure itself, in the eyes of some, is actually worse. I think they said there was one particular set of circumstances that would result in a $5 million charge, where prior had been like $3 million. I think that's on a shipment of oil or something of that nature. And so, there's some uncertainty, some confusion, as to what all of this will look like when we all get there, get to the end of it. But for now, it appears that, good news at the very least, in the sense that we aren't going to be hit with these, dollar plus sort of port fees on ag exports. Trade wise, we'll be paying attention to that too. Trade, what, anything? We should have more in the way of negotiations there. We did see some back and forth. China did come out here today and say, any of you countries that are debating or thinking about listening to the US and reducing your trade ties with us, we will find you. We know where you live. Don't do it. It's not very smart.
obviously,
And so
this is an actual quote. This is they actually did say yo.
Dudes, we are not a fan of this.
Come on,
Actually,
man.
was Xi. Exactly, that was what he said last night. It's in Twitter. I saw it, and so I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, so they're a little bit like, let's not and say we did. That is one of the biggest things we're seeing hang up, or probably be the potential hang up to Japan. And so, silence always makes me a little nervous. It's just me, part of my, it's a bug, not a feature, in the sense that I can't stand silence. But it is a little odd. We had Japan come into town last week. They've been super quiet, and with the push from the US to kind of try to limit some of this back and forth with China, with some of their trade partners and things like that. Like, to me, that's the biggest hurdle there for Japan currently. And there was some talk, there was a little bit of confusion. Now, maybe it was because the boss showed up. You know what I mean? Like, you ever had a boss show up unexpectedly to the meeting and just kind of toss everything off kilter. Not speaking from personal experience at all. But I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and so maybe that's a little bit of it. But some representatives from the Japan side had said, there's a lack of clarity. And I think we've heard that from some more folks. So hopefully we'll get some additional clarity in messaging. South Korea will be in town. We'll hear more about the meeting between Italy and the US, though no, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make a Pope joke about yesterday. That's too soon. But, there might be some
Oh,
frustration on Vance. It's about Vance, like where it's like, oh, okay. But anyway, we've got some things that are happening that we want to be paying attention to with the positive signs. Vietnam has said that they will look to work with the US on restricting some of the Chinese imports into their country. And so there's just so many moving pieces there. So many different things. Trump did say late last week, I was going to see if you'd been obviously you've been paying attention, but it was interesting to have him kind of hint like Xi and he had been talking, or China and they had been talking far more than what the reports indicate. They are going to put together a
yeah.
good deal. We're just hearing the same stuff. The deals are in place. The negotiations are happening. We hear from the some parties of the negotiation where there's some confusion, maybe a lack of clear mission. But we will be looking to see if we can get a trade deal announced. Vance is in India. South Korea, like I said, is coming into town. The meeting between Italy and the US was pretty decent last week. Hopefully we'll get some sort of established, point person for China. And so, underneath the whole trade updates umbrella, there's like 7 different little things, 70 probably actually, that we're paying
Yeah.
attention to. But those are the big ones. Is there anything that I'm missing in the trade update? Because there's so many moving parts.
No,
Did Britain do
no,
anything?
this
We
is
didn't.
it. We're seeing even it's so messy at the moment, even from China. Depends on like who's speaking. We're kind of getting different tones. Like
Yes.
we've had very much the tone from China saying, "Look, we want to make a deal, but we will fight to the end if we don't get one." So you're like, "Oh, there was no need to say the last little bit," but yeah, it feels like everyone. Well, as we said before last week, everyone wants to make a deal, but
Yes.
it's on whose terms and at what stage. Well, the feeling I've had on a couple of things and this is kind of proving the case with the Ukraine Russia situation, is Trump seems to be a big believer in time kills deals,
Yes.
which is
Which
a
is
great
true.
old saying, which my CFO keeps ramming down my throat when we're trying to do B2B sales, and it's very very true. And Trump seems to definitely be playing this kind of towing that line. So it'll be
Yes.
interesting to see if Vance, or I'm not saying Vance is going to be making the deals, but obviously the Italy, South Korea, Japan, and the UK are very much at the forefront of making deals with Trump. And if these deals go along the lines of what we anticipate, which is there will be negotiations and there will be positive remarks coming out this week, that leads like 5 decent kind of economies. And also with the EU coming along and kind of towing Meloni's line from Italy, then that does kind of shape the China conversation slightly differently, in my opinion, because it will mean that Trump has more leverage because he can say, like, look, I've already made deals with these guys.
Yes.
You've got to come on board. And I think that's why we're starting to see a bit of a fracture with China kind of really kind of getting cozy with Southeast Asia nations, kind of saying, look, don't fall for Trump's kind of rhetoric, stick with us, we're the biggest kind of guy in the area. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, but I think it could be getting to kind of crunch point over the next week or so where deals are starting to be made with big economies, which kind of puts more pressure on the economies that haven't made deals.
I feel like the EU, and this may be putting too much onto them, so I apologize if folks think that. Also, don't mind Colton singing in the background. He's not going to school today, so he's jamming. But I do feel like the EU is perhaps the most important shoe to drop here in the short term. Just
Yeah.
my thought. Like, if you can get the European
Yeah. No,
Union to go with you and not with China, that really pushes China on the end, especially if you can get Vietnam and a couple of the other Southeast Asian
yeah,
countries.
absolutely.
I think then that pushes
Absolutely.
the pressure, So yeah,
One
exactly. Go ahead.
One interesting thing on the EU front is this whole tax for big tech, which we
Mm-hmm.
know EU is savage about. And there were rumors that we're going to try and kind of like water it down slightly, but we did have some comments out earlier on when I was mid cutting some thorny bush that I got roped into doing on my Monday. I saw some comments coming out of the EU saying they're looking to push ahead with the big tech taxes. So that'd be an interesting one, because that's something that Trump himself has singled out and said, look, we're not keen on that because you're penalizing US companies.
Mm-hmm.
On the plus side for the UK, there has been rumours that the UK might be looking to kind of provide a kind of a regulatory safe haven for US big tech, kind of like what Ireland used to do, or
Mhm.
what Ireland are doing. So it'd be interesting to see if maybe the UK and the EU start kind of playing each other off, in favor of Trump. But like you said, I completely agree. We need the EU to kind of sign something, and then that will put a load of pressure on China.
Yes.
And obviously, we know Meloni's done Meloni's gone a long way, but she was speaking on behalf of Italy first rather than the EU when she was in the US.
Which the EU said not to. Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, she's going to do that," and the EC's like, "No, no, no, it'll be okay." And France is like, "See, see, we
This
told
is it.
you." Like,
I nearly fell out with people on Twitter before she went over. I was like, look, I guarantee she's going over and she's basically going to be preaching Italy, because you got to remember that Maloney isn't a fan of the EU
not at
herself.
all.
So
No, yeah.
why people were thinking that she was going to go over as like the EU emissary. I was like, no, this is not how it works. She'll be going over to sell Italy
Which,
rather than the EU.
with the trade surplus that Italy has with the US, that is, I mean, it's in their best interest to do it or whatever. Like,
Oh,
and the
massively,
relationship is
massively.
good and yada yada. So those will be all of the things that we're watching. Like, that's the fun part. I maybe you didn't see the air quotes. So my idea of fun's a little twisted, I guess, but it is interesting. Or I've always enjoyed watching interpersonal relationships and the dynamics that come from that, and that's part of why I love my job: the negotiation, the back and forth, the
Yeah,
conversation. And so it's interesting to see who is the good negotiator and who's playing the game, who's good at playing the game, who's not so great at playing the game. And so yeah, now that the holiday is out of the way, or at least will be for the rest of the world tomorrow, we will be able to focus on trade updates, and hopefully we'll see some sort of deal come out this week. Next thing that we're paying attention to, because trade updates are not geopolitical, they're geopolitical, but they're not, I guess, geopolitical in the sense that we're also trying to solve a couple wars here, or potential wars.
yeah,
We've got the Russia-Ukraine situation. That was interesting. Russia declared like this last minute ceasefire that they say they honored. Ukraine says they didn't. They say Ukraine didn't honor it. Ukraine's like, we didn't even know there was one. We're just mirroring what you're doing at this point in time. And we have some back and forth. Apparently, the US did present Ukraine with what they are saying is kind of the final framework for peace, that they're going to present. They said, here's this deal. It includes, you giving up your NATO desire to be into NATO, probably going to have to give up some territory. We are going to admit Crimea as Russia's, and a handful of other things. There's a couple other factors included in there. And basically, the gist or the talk is that if Ukraine doesn't say, yep, we'll agree to these things, basically the US is just gonna be like, whatever, we're done,
yeah.
we're out, bye.
And again, time kills deals.
Yes, yeah. And at this point in time, you're probably not getting anywhere, honestly. And even if Ukraine did, agree to whatever it is that Trump is putting out there, the likelihood of Russia agreeing to it is probably pretty limited, because Russia's push is that Ukraine basically abandons the territory that Russia has entered into. And so there's going to be a back and forth there, a lot of things to be paying attention to, but the likelihood is that situation is probably not going to be resolved anytime soon and could potentially escalate. And no one really knows what it looks like if Ukraine does push back on some of these proposals that the US has put in place, not only for natural resources. We haven't really heard more about that. They hired a team of lawyers and some of these other things, but they haven't really come back with a secondary natural resource proposal, first things first. And secondly, like, what is this, that we're going to be agreeing to? And there is some talk that Ukraine may really struggle with that. How does Trump react? Because he has, again, a couple different times reiterated that Ukraine, has some responsibility for the war. I'm not agreeing,
Yeah.
disagreeing, whatever. It's just what he said. And so,
Just a reminder that we're not political on this
yeah,
show at
exactly. I
all.
don't
We're just saying
even.
that. Do not write in and tell us, like, and just shout at us, please.
I don't have the capacity for being overly political at this point in time. But that is the one thing that we're kind of watching, is how does the US and Ukraine kind of do this, and the likelihood of seeing Russia really kind of be like, oh yeah, great, let's agree to this. I mean, the weather is improving. They're one step ahead of Ukraine in a lot of the things that they're doing here. And one of the contingencies that the US is apparently pushing is that it does take control of Zaporozhye, and which we know that Russia is like, no, bro, not happening. And so we'll see. Um,
Sorry, just point out for any new listeners, the reason why I started giggling then is
I
because it's
can't
an
say
ongoing joke
it.
how Angie
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm not laughing at the situation. I promise you I'm not laughing at the
it's an
situation.
inside joke
I'm
on
laughing at
the,
Angie.
yeah.
I'm laughing at Angie pronouncing the
I can't say
situation.
it. It's terrible. It's embarrassing. Like that's why I'm better in written word than spoken. But yeah, so we've got just a hell of a lot of things, and I haven't even mentioned the weather. And
Oh yeah.
so we're now entering in. It is April 21st. We're the third week of April. We have had a lot of heavy rain falling across parts of the Delta in the mid South. A lot of folks down that way are starting to kind of look at the forecast and be like, "Oh, this is not good." We have some issues here with potential delays. It is early yet. A lot of times, my friend Matt Campbell says 70% by mid-May is kind of the target, 70% planted by mid-May. So we've got 3 weeks, 3+ weeks to kind of get there before we have to be worried about delayed planting. But the forecast in place right now is likely to result in, a potential for smaller acres of corn in the mid South and in the Delta. A lot of places down that way, you're running into situations across parts of Arkansas, maybe even Missouri. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Where you're getting into late planting. And so your insurance coverage is there, but it starts to go down each day because the later you plant, the more likely you are to see production problems happen because of the temperatures during the summer, or because of what you'll see from a weather standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. And so we'll definitely be watching that. The Western Corn Belt has had fantastic progress in a lot of spots. They are going to see some decent rain come in, across parts of Iowa. This is something that you couldn't ask for a better last week of progress, and then a nice inch and a half or so of rain yesterday that took all day. So there are some spots that are really good, but there are some spots that are not so great, and it could potentially see some delays. It should impact wheat as well. Too much rain is the worst thing for wheat to really experience. It causes quality issues and disease. And so lots of things to be paying attention to. The dollar's lower today, of course, because we're worried about what's going to happen if Trump does remove Powell, or if he can. Does that shake confidence and some of these other things? And so many dang moving pieces. I can't even squeeze it all into
Exactly.
15 minutes anymore. And we started at
Well,
5 originally.
this is, do you know what? I completely forgot. Oh my god. But I will argue until the cows come home that we're adding value, so it doesn't matter how long it takes. And fortunately, our listeners seem to agree. But absolutely. But Angie,
Yes.
so I'm trying to eat a pistachio.
Be
Sorry.
careful.
Angie, thank you so much as always. You're an absolute star. I'm going to go back to some manual labor in the
Get back into
garden
that
before
thorny
some.
bush.
That's it. Oi, oi, oi. On that note, quick, moving on. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we really appreciate you, and we will see you tomorrow. Happy Easter.
Have a great Monday, you guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
God.